Well, good afternoon. It is April 28th, Wednesday. It's pretty gray and rainy outside. I'm glad that you're able to be here with us this afternoon as we continue our study titled, Who is Jesus? We've been going through the life of Christ, and we are just getting started. We're only a few weeks into this, so if you're behind, go catch up on the videos. And moving forward, I want to invite you to join us here as we continue this study here at the Fort Cobb Church of Christ building. Next week, we will be assembling in person on Wednesday nights, and this Sunday, May 2nd, we will be resuming all of our classes. Even the kids will have Bible class here, and so bring your children, let them learn about the God who created them, and come to our adult Bible class, and we'll all be in the auditorium there. There's plenty of room to spread out, and we're just so excited to be able to return back to our full classes this coming Sunday, and next Wednesday, we will be in person. I'm still going to try to record these and put them up, but it will be a more interactive format as there will be people to be able to listen and ask questions. And so if that's something you're interested in, please visit us anytime that we're assembled together, we'd love to have you. We're going to continue on in our study about who is Jesus. This will be a short lesson. I know preachers' famous last words, but I believe that this will be a short lesson because we are only going to cover and finish up the childhood of Jesus. Now, we're going to do a recap here just briefly so we can see where we're at in the birth story and in the narrative of the life of Christ. We saw in Luke 2, 1 through 21, Joseph and Mary, they've traveled to Bethlehem. Jesus is born. The shepherds in the nearby field come and they worship him. They see him there. We see that he's circumcised and named according to the law. And then we saw in Luke 21 through 40, 2:21 through 40, that Jesus is presented in the temple after 40 days. Mary also would be cleansed during that time. Simeon and Anna, they rejoice and tell others about Jesus, how he's going to reconcile the kingdom, reconcile Jerusalem. Then we saw in Matthew 2, 1 through 12, that the wise men, the Magi, come from the east. They're going to worship the newborn king. That's what they say, who has been born king of Israel. And they were warned not to go back to Herod, and so Joseph also was warned in a dream, and so they flee to Egypt, him and his Mary and Joseph and Jesus. They flee to Egypt to keep Jesus safe. And when the time is safe again, he is told to return back home, and he does. He returns to Nazareth. That's where we picked up last week, where we learned about very little being written about the childhood of Jesus. We then saw, let's see, I'm going to skip down. We talked about Jesus being presented at the temple, the wise men, the flight into Egypt, and now we're going to look at young Jesus in the temple at Jerusalem at 12 years of age. So if you have your Bibles, let me pull that up. We're going to be here in Luke 2 and starting in verse 41. And we're going to read this account. We're going to talk about it a little bit, and then we will be finished. So not a whole lot tonight. Let's start in verse 41 here. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances, and when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Okay. Well, they went up. We're going to look at a few maps here. I'm hoping, I remember talking to you about this when we talked about Mary and Joseph making the trip from Nazareth down to Bethlehem. I don't believe I showed a map at that time. I'm going to try to show you a map here, and so you can kind of see where those two places are. I think understanding the geography of a location of the text and how that fits in is useful and beneficial to our understanding of it. But they're heading down from Nazareth, which is north in the northern area, north of Samaria, really. They're going to head down to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. Now, this was 7 days during the month of Abib, which is during the time of our months of March and April. And I'm going to take you to the scripture here. If you're not familiar with the feast of the Passover, I remember saying at the beginning of this, I wanted to make it as simple as possible and try to introduce you to these biblical concepts, these biblical ideas as we go through, in case you're new. That way you're not lost. The Feast of the Passover was something that God commanded the Jews to keep in remembrance of what he did for them in Egypt. We're going to read here in Exodus 23 and verse 15. God said, "You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. As I commanded you, you shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time in the month of Abib. For in it you came out of Egypt. None shall appear before me empty-handed. You shall keep the feast of the harvest, of the first fruits of your labor, of what you sow in the field. You shall keep the feast of the ingathering, and at the end of the year, when you gather in from the field the fruit of your labor." I think we're going to stop there. The feast of the Passover was to remind them of how God, the angel of death, through the commandment of God, had passed over the houses of the Jews in Egypt, and how God struck down the firstborn of the entire land of Egypt, except for those Jews who had done what the Lord had commanded, which was kill a lamb, an unblemished lamb, and put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost and the lintel of the places in which they lived, and went in and stayed there and did not come out. And God passed over the houses of the Jews. And so this was the feast that commemorated that event. So for 7 days, they did not have leaven in their homes. They would eat unleavened bread, as they had no time to do that. They didn't have time to leaven their bread during that original event, because God was going to tell them to be ready to make haste out of the land of Egypt, so they didn't have time to let their bread rise. And so they didn't have it. And this was their giant feast that they would remember in the month of Abib. And the Jews practiced this yearly. It was a very important event. Even when Jesus gets older, you're going to see this event continue to play a huge role in his life and in the life of all the Jews. So we see in this event, as they go down to, let's go back. As they go down to Jerusalem to keep this event, that Jesus is now 12 years old. And so this would have been a big time during the life of Jesus. At 12 years old, a Jewish boy is considered to be coming into manhood, so he's getting to have more responsibility. This is something that I think we as a society could probably learn a lot from here in the West. I think 12-year-old boys in Jewish society at the time of Jesus' birth were probably responsible for a whole lot more than our 12-year-old children are today. This would be a time where he would be expected to be seriously studying the scripture. It would have been a time where he would have been expected to kind of figure out what he's going to do for a living and start mentoring underneath somebody to figure out what he's going to do to make money as an adult. Perhaps he was mentoring under Joseph to be a carpenter, to work with his hands, to be an artist or an artisan of some kind. But what happens in this account is they go to the feast, and as it ends, and the family, now this is important for us to note too, usually, kind of in our Western society, if we're going to go down somewhere, well, a family unit might load up in the car and we'll just go. We don't really wait on the whole town to caravan together. What would have happened in this case, most likely, as this is a 2-day journey from Nazareth down to Jerusalem, is that everybody in Nazareth would have kind of got everything together and they would have left at the same time. Now, how many people are there in Nazareth? I don't really know, but it's a few. It's enough to where obviously you could lose a child if you just thought that they were with the group. And so this group of people from Nazareth would have left. It calls them family and acquaintances later in the scriptures. They would have left down to Jerusalem. They would have spent time there during the feast, and then they would have headed back. Now, for whatever reason, we're not told as much, of course, as we would probably like about this account. There's so many questions that I have. If I could talk to Luke, I would want to ask him, hey, what about this? But we don't have that information, and maybe he didn't either, which is why he didn't write it down. So he stays behind at Jerusalem while his family and the caravan from Nazareth head back to Nazareth. Now I want to show you I'm going to pull up a map here. I'm hoping that this shows up good. Oh no. Let's see. How am I going to get this to show up? Should have tested this beforehand, huh? All right. Well, if I could get this sidebar out of the way, that would be helpful. Hey, I figured it out. All right. So this is the map of what were the area of Judea and Samaria up here. You can see Nazareth is up here north of Samaria. So they would have had to pass through, if this is the route that they took, which would have been the shortest route. This was a 24-hour walk. If you walked it all the way in one day, it'd take you 24 hours. So this is a 2-day trip. If you walked a solid 12 hours a day, starting very early and starting at daylight and ending at dusk, you could walk 12 hours. Probably maybe even a 3-day journey if you wanted to make it even more less demanding, right? So here they come from Nazareth. They walk down to Jerusalem here. This is indicated by the orange line. This is the line down. Then they head back up the whole caravan through the green line, and they say they make it up here to Lebona. I don't think the text tells us. They say they'll make it a day's journey, so that's where they end up to rest. And when they get there, they start looking around. Perhaps they go back to the back of the caravan where all the rest of the teenagers would have been, and they start asking, where's Jesus? And he's nowhere to be found. They search with all the relatives and acquaintances. He's nowhere to be found. And you can imagine the panic and the terror of Mary and Joseph having lost the Son of God. It had to be a very scary time for them. Thankfully, he's 12 years old. If he's back in Jerusalem, they probably can count on him to be safe. And so they head back via, this red line back to Jerusalem here. And they find him. So it says after 3 days, they find him. Now, the question is, what are these 3 days? I tend to believe that this is a 3 days starting from the time they left. So they traveled a day, they headed back a day, and on the third day, as they're searching for him around Jerusalem, they find him. I'm not sure. I don't think this means that they searched in Jerusalem for 3 days before they found him. But either way you want to look at it, doesn't bother me any. It's just way I read it. And they find him. And where is Jesus when they find him? Well, he's doing amazing things, right? He's in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening. Now notice, he's not just teaching, right? Jesus, even at 12 years old, probably knows more than the teachers, right? He is the Word become flesh. And so he knows more, but he's listening to them and asking them questions. And apparently, he's answering too, because It says they were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And so they're kind of having a dialogue. He's hearing them, he's asking them, they're asking him, he's answering, and it's everyone that's there is amazed at his understanding and his answers. This is an incredible sight. This 12-year-old in there with the teachers of the law, speaking to them, answering them. It tells us that they were greatly distressed while they were searching for him. They say, why have you treated us so? Well, we were leaving. You should have jumped in with the caravan. Now, we don't know the story. Did Jesus miss out? Was he so enamored with the temple that he ended up going there and lost track of time? How does that work? I don't have the answers to that. How does the Son of God lose track of time? How does he get distracted? How does he wind up getting separated from his family? I don't know. We're not told. We just know that he was, and apparently the parents believed that it was his fault. Why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. His first words. The first words of Jesus are recorded here in Luke 2 and verse 49 when he says, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" Pretty incredible words from a 12-year-old. The idea here is you should have known that this is where I would be. Perhaps, they came back, they traveled the day, they came back a day, and perhaps they were looking all around where, in his family's homes or wherever they stayed, and maybe they looked at the temple last, and he's saying that should have been the first place you came. You should have known that that's where I would be, in my Father's house. Now, there's interesting things that these words relate to us. I believe these words tell us that even at 12 years old, Jesus knew his true father. Now, that doesn't mean that he disrespected Joseph in any way. We're going to see later that that's not the case at all. He very much respected his parents. He lived the perfect life, and because he lived the perfect life, that includes respecting his parents, as the scriptures tell us to do. But also at 12 years old, he showed astonishing wisdom and knowledge about the law and about spiritual things, that he was spiritually engaged even at 12 years old. Now, some of us who can remember back to when we were 12 years old, that we may remember that perhaps we weren't that spiritual. Perhaps we had other things that preoccupied our minds. Perhaps we were too busy with sports or extracurricular activities or school or whatever the case may be. But Jesus, his primary objective and his goal and his one of his most important things that were on his mind even at 12 years old was spiritual things. We see here, we keep reading, they did not understand what he said to them. But then in 51 it says, he went down with them to Nazareth and was submissive to them, and his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. We see that Jesus was submissive to his parents, even knowing who he is the Son of God, the Word become flesh. But the thing about what's awesome about the story of Jesus is he's not God in the flesh coming down here to show us, to demand what he could demand, to force us into submission, to force us to do things the right way. Jesus, young boy Jesus, is submissive to his parents. Now, I wonder what that looked like. As a parent myself, I wonder what that looked like, because I know that I'm not perfect, and I know that even with my kids, I've made mistakes. I've had problems I've probably disciplined the wrong person when someone else, was deserving of the discipline, or perhaps I wasn't attentive enough, or I didn't listen enough. And I wonder, I know that Joseph and Mary weren't perfect parents, and I wonder how much grace that Jesus had to extend to them as a child, yet was still submissive to them. I wish we had more about what that looked like, right? It's an interesting thing. Jesus, the Word become flesh, who was God in the flesh, didn't come down here. He was submissive to his parents. Why? He showed us how to live. He didn't just come down here to force us to do it the right way. He showed us how to do it the right way. And among that is being submissive and obedient to your parents. All right, so I know we're only at like 20 minutes. I know we try to go 30, but here's where we're going to end for tonight. And then we will be in class next week. We'll pick up with the ministry of John the Baptist and moving into the ministry, the public ministry of Jesus, moving forward from there. But I wanted to kind of wrap up the childhood of Jesus tonight. So from these accounts, his young childhood accounts from after he's born to what we've talked about tonight, what do we learn? Well, one, the wise men, the magi, they were indeed wise, right? I've heard sermons with that title, Be Wise Like the Wise Men. And it's a great idea because these were Gentiles, and they're the first Gentiles recorded in Scripture to bow down and worship to Jesus. And of course, that is what we all have to do and what we all should do. And they were the first ones to realize it, to understand that, and to do that. So that's an incredible thought. And it shows who he was. We also see the Father's providential protection of the Son. Time and time again, when Jesus, as a child and was vulnerable, he comes to Joseph in a dream and he tells him to get out of there. He tells him when to come back. He's watching over him. He's not about to let his grand plan of redemption be ruined by someone, by an evil king, right? He's providentially protecting the Messiah throughout the young childhood of Jesus. We also see that Jesus was not born to a family of great wealth and influence. As we saw in Mary's offering after her 40 days for her purification, they didn't bring a lamb. They brought the minimal amount that was required by the law because that's what it made available to them if they couldn't afford it. Also, this kind of goes along with what was mentioned by Nathanael in John 1 and verse 46, where he asked the question to Philip, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Nazareth was kind of viewed as a despised town, one without much there. Not much there in the way of infrastructure. There was not very many people in that area. It was north. You had to go through Samaria to get there. And so the question, the view of most Jewish people, especially those down in Judea, would have been, can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's just kind of a way of saying they don't expect anything good to come out of Nazareth. We see this in other places. Chapter 7 and verse 41, others said, this is the Christ, but some said, is the Christ to come from Galilee? As if they couldn't believe that would be the case. And let's see here. There's another account here where the Pharisees say, are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee. So this was in response to Nicodemus when he says, does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing? And they respond this way. So there was a lot of prejudice against those from the area of Galilee and from Nazareth. And so Jesus was not born to this wealthy, well-to-do, well-known, privileged family from Jerusalem. And then we see, even from a young age, Jesus knew who he was. There was no doubt who he was. He said, I had to be in my Father's house. And so that's where he was. He was in his Father's house. Let me get back to Luke 2. I guess we don't need to get back there. So that's it for tonight. That is all that we have. I hope that this has been an interesting study for you. If you have any questions on that I didn't get to tonight, I'd love to answer those. It's an interesting account. I wish we had more. I wish we knew what Jesus was asking, what he was hearing from those in the temple. It's amazing to me to think that from 12 to when he's in his 30s, 28 years is going to or 18 years is going to pass. And it is all but likely that some of those same teachers that were there when he was 12 are going to still be there during the time of his public ministry. And I wonder if they recognized him. I wonder if they remembered him from his 3 days in the temple, answering and asking them questions and showing his incredible wisdom. I can't help but imagine that maybe they did. Or did it come to mind later? I don't know. It's an amazing thing. I wish we knew more about it, but that is what we have recorded for us from the book of Luke. All right. Again, my name's Jared Pettyjohn, preaching minister here at Fort Cobb Church of Christ. My number's on the screen. If you want to text me or call me, I'd love to hear from you. And you can always send me a message or leave a comment on this video if you want me to talk about anything or respond about any questions you might have about the text. So, all right. Well, I hope to see you here in person on Sunday morning. We will be starting at 9:30. Classes start at 9:30 a.m. For the first time in over a year, we'll be back in our Bible classes. So excited for that. Worship starts at 10:30. This Sunday, we're going to look at, well, let me first say, last Sunday, if you watched the sermon, you know that we talked about how the world hates Christians. It comes from John chapter 15, where Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he says, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. This week, we're going to take a look at how we should respond as Christians to a world that hates us. And it's counter to what the world might think. So I hope that you'll join us for that at 10:30. Hopefully you'll be here with us at 9:30 as we do our Bible study. And until then, I hope to see you, and I hope you have a blessed day.